This is Trademark East Africa, growing prosperity through trade. Now let's talk trade.
Part of the East Africa Community strategy is to encourage women to get involved in the region's integration of trade. It is recognized that women make a significant contribution towards the growth of economies, but women tend to be more affected by the negative side effect of trade liberalization than men when it comes to taking advantages and opportunities that trade offers. In this show, we'll find out, why does gender in trade matter, and what does it mean to be a woman working in trade within East Africa? My guest today is a gender specialist. She works tirelessly to make sure that both women and men participate equally in trade across East Africa. Makena, welcome to Let's Talk Trade.
Thank you, Dennis.
So Makena, why gender in trade?
Gender in trade is important because men and women need to benefit and participate equally from trade. However, we find across East Africa, women tend not to participate as much as they should because they face specific challenges or barriers that are just specific to women.
So what are these barriers to trade that women face?
Some of these barriers include ignorance when it comes to border operations, procedures, and even reforms. We find that some of these reforms are being changed quite often, and women do not know what the procedures, what changes have been made in the procedures. We find that women also do not have much information or knowledge when it comes to technical standards. Whenever you have to move goods from one country to another, some of those goods need to meet specific standards, and women often are not aware about these standards or have never been exposed to these standards. Women also face a lot of harassment when it comes to trading across the borders, harassment from border officials. Many of them are often asked for sexual favors, just because they do not have the information they need. And then there's also the lack of infrastructure, which is also both men and women, but you find that women again have more challenges. For example, when it comes to accessing the ICT platforms, the single windows, or even when you look at issues of access to finance, that's also another challenge that women face when it comes to trade.
Okay, so what is Trademark doing to address this imbalance?
We have actually streamlined our programs and projects to make sure that they have components that include activities that address some of these challenges. Because the whole idea is to make sure that you create that platform where both men and women are able to engage from the different operations that we do. So for example, we're working with organizations like Profam in Rwanda, or Search for Common Ground in Burundi, or IASI, to really bring these women into groups, into associations, because it's much easier to work with them when they're under associations. With the IASI, we've partnered with them to put in place resource centers at some of the East African community borders. We have 3, one in Malaba, one in Mutukula, and the other one in Busia. And these resource centers are places where the women can come together and get information on the procedures, for example, on the rules, when it comes to taxation, when it comes to clearing agents, how do you use the clearing agents, what kind of amounts of goods the value of goods that need, for example, to pay tax. We've also looked at the one-stop border posts, which we're under Trademark, and making sure that the posts are friendly, whether they was putting a hook on for them to put their bags, or places where they can change their children. So it's really just trying to make sure that both needs are met.
Okay, so that seems quite a bit of work that has really gone on there. Now let's look at policy. How are we then looking at trade policy to make sure that it also promotes women?
So when you look at trade policy, I think it's like a whole spectrum of issues, because we're looking at, when it comes either to the access to credit or finance, when we look at the social safety nets, when we're looking at insurance or medical covers for the women who are involved in trade, looking at also the infrastructure piece. So it means a lot of the different policymakers coming together to see what kind of interventions need to be made so that the intervention can be complete. So we at Trademark have focused mainly on the access to markets component and giving the women the capacity they need to be able to access the markets within East Africa. But then now we need to work together as a group to make sure that the access to finance component is also taken care of, and also the whole business enabling environment.
Okay, so quite interesting work that you've been doing with Profam. You said Profam, Search for Common Ground, and IASI.
Right.
Why this group important to you?
So the women informal cross-border traders, I mean, it's a very important group, mainly because of the size. I mean, most of the research shows us that 80% of informal cross-border traders are women. So if we're talking about 80%, that's a large, I'm sure you'll agree with me, that's a large percentage.
Quite.
So that is why we have really focused on that sector. And we find that these women, most of these businesses, some of them are registered, some of them are not registered. But informal cross-border traders covers also people who are working or involved in tradable goods across the borders, but they're also women who are providing professional services, whether it's health, nutrition, and also the women who are trading in agricultural products. So this is a group that we focused on mainly because of the size of the group, and then also because of the challenges that we talked about in the beginning, and making sure that we're able to bring it up to speed. But having said that, our work does not only focus on informal cross-border traders, because we're also doing a lot of work with women in small and medium enterprises, whether in the manufacturing services, making sure that their capacity is enhanced when it comes to standards, for example, so that they can trade both within the region and globally.
Let's take a look at a woman in trade, talking about the support she has received from Trademark East Africa.
Tetufunyeemu kati okuva olwetwayingira mu kibiina ekyo baageza kutulaga okumanya bwa bwe tuyinza okugondezebwamu mu kusala ensalo. Mu ofiisi omwo ng'ogiyitiddemu oyambibwako n'okola naye nga obutale bwe butannaba kulabika nga buyise mu ofiisi eyo. Naye essaawa zino ku kyamisolo oba abakyala ogenda nga tumanyigana tugenze tufunamu okumanyigana olw'emisomo gye bagenze batuwa. Kyala bagenze Busia, bagenze Kenya, bagenze Katuna, so ekiri.
So Makena, if we encourage women to trade, will it increase the amount of investment in our country and therefore allow it to prosper?
Absolutely. If I could just take you back to the old adage, if you empower a woman, you empower the whole village, and as a result, the whole community. Research shows us that women reinvest up to 90% of increased income back into their family, whether it's in education, whether it's in health or in nutrition, as compared to men who invest 46%. This is a study that was actually done by the World Bank. And some other research done by Booz and Company showed that countries which focused on women's entrepreneurship and women's employment actually had an increase in the GDP. For example, Egypt increased their GDP by 34% simply by focusing on women. So what you're saying is true. If we focus on, and that's really why gender and trade is important, is because we are now working with both sides of the population, both men and women, because the whole idea is that to make sure that we work with them both at the same time, and then that way everybody benefits.
Makena, thank you for appearing on Let's Talk Trade.
Thank you very much.
That was an edition of Let's Talk Trade. For more information on any of the topics being discussed on the show, visit our website www.trademarkea.com.